Welcome to the Irish NFL Show's Week 5 game preview and picks show brought to you by QuinnBet. Thanks to all of you who are joining us this evening on our X, YouTube and Twitch feeds. Thank you all. Also to those listening back to us on the podcast. The weekly picks and preview show is available from Friday morning onwards. We're thankful as always for your support, and we hope that if you do like what you hear or see, that you'll tell a friend or like and subscribe on whichever podcast platform you use. It really does help us, and it helps others to find the Irish NFL Show. It's Brian O'Leary, Noel Dowling and Shane Brennan joining myself, Conor Brophy, this week for the picks. Brian and Shane, of course, will be off to Tottenham Hotspur Stadium for the first of this season's London games on Sunday. So for this weekend, the menu is one afternoon game on Sunday from N17 in London. That is that Jets and Vikings clash that Brian and Shane will be in attendance at. We have 6 games in the 6 p.m. window, 4 games in the 9 p.m. window. Then we close out with our preview of the Sunday night game. This is the first weekend of the season where we have teams inactive, of course. That's a little watch out for all of us with fantasy league teams. You might want to make sure you know which players will be in and out. The 4 teams on a bye week, for your information, are the Philadelphia Eagles, the Los Angeles Chargers, the Detroit Lions, and the Tennessee Titans. Our Thursday night football podcast, incidentally, with Noel and Kieran O'Donovan, previews the NFC South clash in Atlanta that kicks off early on Friday morning Irish time, and you'll find that podcast across all of your platforms. Our first segment of picks is brought to you by RuPoint, and that is the 2:30 on Sunday kickoff. Remember that early Sunday kickoff where the Jets take on the Vikings. The Vikings, the home team, the nominal home team at Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. They're 3-point favourites. That's 11-10, which is a slightly enhanced price with our partner QuinnBet. So a good one if you fancy the Vikings in that one. The standard line elsewhere is 2.5 points. QuinnBet offering you 3 points. The Vikings -3. Brian, before we get into this game, of course, we will talk about the wide receivers on both teams, Garrett Wilson and Justin Jefferson, among the talent that will be taken to the field in London. But a lot of intrigue surrounding where the final destination will be of Davante Adams, who was on his way out of Las Vegas by all accounts. The Raiders prepared to listen to trade inquiries. A lot of receiver-needy teams that could greatly benefit from his services. Arguably the greatest route runner in the NFL, and on his day, arguably the best receiver in the NFL, who's been catching passes from a lot of substandard quarterbacks over the past couple of seasons. And as we saw in the Netflix receiver documentary during the offseason, not particularly happy about the situation in Vegas. So this isn't going to come as a surprise to too many people, but there'll be teams there licking their chops at the possibility of adding him to their receiver room.
Yeah, but I think inevitably, by and large, we all have a good understanding, I think, where it ultimately is going to end up, and that's with the Jets next week. It kind of plays into the week that's ahead. Jets are in London. He's not going to play. He's declared unavailable, or he's some suspect injury of some sort that's going to discontinue his opportunity to play on Sunday for the Raiders. Look, I was reading a little bit more into this today, and in particular around how Tom Telesco got the job, because he wasn't the first choice GM. Champ Kelly was, but they didn't feel Champ Kelly was ready to be a GM. They wanted to bring Tom Telesco in as assistant GM, and even those two weren't particularly the first choice. They had other names in the hat, and every single one of those who went for the interview said, "What would your first point of business be?" And they said to trade Davante Adams. He is 32 years of age. He's on the downside, and you're on the hook for 13 million this year. So the Raiders want rid of that 13 million. I think overall it's a 32 million hit over the course of the next 2 to 3 years. So whilst the Raiders are kind of playing the right game, a strategic game to say, oh, Davante wants out, I think they'd be quite relieved to move him on because of the cap held they could end up in because of the nature of the contract. When it comes to Davante Adams, I think ultimately he wants to go to the Jets, and I think he's going to get his wish, because I think Aaron Rodgers, as we touched on Monday when Kieran really went off, and Aaron Rodgers on Robert Saleh in terms of what's going on there, I think ultimately he seems to be the one calling all the shots, and he's put a wish list together over the last I suppose 18 months since he went there. It didn't really materialize to a certain extent up to now, but I think he'll get his wish next week. I think he'll be traded to the Jets. I think they'll get a second round, but I think the Raiders might have to consume some of that 13 million, because I don't think any team's going to pay him 13 million and give up a high pick. It's one or the other in this instance for me, and I think ultimately Jets come calling and they get their wish next week, and he's on the Jets team.
Will they get their wish for a win in Tottenham, though?
I think they'll win on Sunday. I do actually think they'll shock. I wouldn't put it down as a massive shock, and I know they're under a lot of pressure. Everybody's so high on the Vikings right now. Like, this is a Jets team. We're only a couple of weeks removed from when they beat the Patriots comprehensively, and everyone was saying this is the Aaron Rodgers of old. The defense played really well. I did kind of say pump the brakes here. It's only the Patriots, with all due respect, and they had a difficult loss last weekend. they should have really won last weekend, though. There was opportunities to put the game away. And I think I've seen so many selections of the Vikings this week. I just think we're in for a great game on Sunday. And Sam Darnold will be looking, I suppose, to put it over on his old team. And people are suggesting, the Vikings are used to playing in London. They were there a couple of years ago. They beat the Saints in a high-scoring game. Well, the Jets played there a couple of years ago against the Vikings. I know it's a different lineup, but Aaron Rodgers has also been there. So I think there's a lot of familiarity for some players going back. And I don't think there's a given as the Vikings just riding into London, becoming 5-0. I think it's one that the Jets will really need to have, and I think they'll find a way on Sunday. So I'm going to go with the Jets.
Brian, the Jets may need to have it, but the Vikings are favoured, and they're favoured for a reason here. They've been going pretty well under the leadership of Kevin O'Connell, and with Sam Darnold reinvented as quarterback.
Yeah, look, it's a fantastic storyline. It's arguably the storyline of the season. The fact that Sam Darnold, who was a backup at the 49ers last year under Kyle Shanahan, he's gone for another very, I suppose, strategic type of head coach, offensive-minded head coach in Kevin O'Connell. For me, Kevin O'Connell's one of the best head coaches in the league. Okay, he may not have got the Vikings beyond that wild card round a couple of years ago, but what he's able to do with other quarterbacks time and time again just kind of signifies the play caller that he is. And I went back and looked at some of the clips of the interview we did with him a couple of years ago, and he was talking about the precision of Matthew Stafford in the Super Bowl. The level of detail he goes into around the quarterbacks is fantastic. So it probably shouldn't come as a surprise that Sam Darnold has reacted well and had a great start to the season. But look, even if they don't win on Sunday, it's still been a fantastic start to the season for the Vikings. But something tells me the Jets are going to come out on Sunday and find a way.
Shane, you had a good look at the Jets when they took on your Patriots a couple of weeks ago. You'll get a good look at them in Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. Are you convinced, like Brian, that they will emerge victorious, or are you leaning towards the favourites in this one?
I'm certainly convinced it is going to be a close game, which is why I took a bit of time to make my pick here, because I really wasn't quite sure what way to go on. I mean, every time the people have bet against the Vikings, Sam Darnold and co has managed to find ways to prove us wrong, even if their fourth quarter defensive performance last week really sort of put up more questions than answers. I am looking at this, the setting for this, though, and thinking that the Jets are turning into a bit of a Spursy outfit, and that they do the difficult bits well, but when it comes to doing the easy parts, they find ways to mess it up, because that game against the Broncos at the weekend was supposed to be the easy one in a very tough early season schedule. But Aaron Rodgers, for reasons which definitely have nothing to do with the cadence, by the way, I want to make that very clear, just kind of dropped the dud and left underthrew a lot of his passes. I don't see that happening again this week, though. And I think the Jets going to embrace the challenge, understand that for the last two games now, they've come out of it with question marks over the relationship between Aaron Rodgers and Robert Saleh. We looked at that sort of debt stare that Aaron Rodgers gave to Robert Saleh against the Patriots, which he says, I was just being hyped up saying 2-score game. And we did see the lip reading saying 2-score game, but come on, you could see in those eyes that there's something not quite right there. And then, of course, the aftermath of the Broncos game recently. But I think if you look at the fact that Aaron Rodgers and a lot of that Jets parts have played abroad before, I'm looking at things like the amount of sacks that Aaron Rodgers took. Aaron Rodgers did take 5 sacks last week. He's going to be facing against another very high pressure defense in what Brian Flores is going to throw at him. But I think unlike in previous weeks, I think that the Jets might find a way to kind of diversify things and keep the Vikings guessing in a way that they can't just keep pressuring in the center all the time. For that reason, I think the Jets might eke a close one here, but it's going to be a nail biter. I'm looking forward to it.
All right, let's move on quickly. We got a lot of games to get to. Noel, what's your pick?
I think I'm going to go Vikings with this one.
Yeah, I was going to say I like pissed off Aaron Rodgers, or I don't like him, but I know from old that the more pissed off he is, the better he seems to play. Not sure that's going to get it done this week, though. It's Vikings for me as well. We move on to Browns and Commanders next. Commanders who've also been going very nicely. Top of the NFC East, favoured in this one by 3 points now.
Yeah, and I think that's the big thing about this game coming up is, we saw what the Commanders done last weekend, and the question is now, is that who this team are? Can they kind of continue this form with Daniels there, quarterback? And I mean, that for me, that's what I'm fascinated to see. In terms of the Browns, look, I think we've kind of got a handle with what the Browns are. They're not very good on offense. Deshaun Watson may have looked slightly better last weekend, but still, for the money you're paying him and just for the production you're getting, it's not where that offense wanted to be, and it's not something that I think will worry the Commanders. On defense, obviously the Browns have a good team, and they can worry teams on their day. But I'm just looking at this Commanders team now, and I'm fascinated to see, can Daniels continue doing that? He was 26 of 30 last weekend, which is great for a rookie coming in against not a great defense, but still, he's a rookie and it's the NFL, and that's what you want to see as he's developing. But also on the ground last weekend, the Commanders did a really good job. Brian Robinson and Jeremy McNichols both came in for almost 170 yards between them and 3 touchdowns. So you're seeing a bit of balance there with the Commanders, which I think is good for them. I think the offensive line has done a lot better than I thought it would this season. We talk about the experienced players they brought in, the experienced head coach and Dan Quinn. And while you don't want to jump too far ahead of everything, I'm quietly kind of impressed with the way they're just kind of developing this team and the way they're building. And for me, I'm fascinated to see this weekend if they can continue that going, or can this Browns defense maybe give them a bit of trouble. Although the Browns defense, while they were quite good in the passing game last week against the Raiders, they gave up a lot of rushing yards. So maybe those 2 running backs can find a bit of joy there if they can stop Daniels. But I think for me, the Commanders will be too strong. I think the Browns are just eking along week after week. That offense is, it's a tough watch for them at the moment. And I think the Commanders, even if they're not the team they were last week, I think they'll still be good enough to get a win this weekend.
I think you've touched on one of the keys there in the game for me, Noel, which is the Browns really struggled to stop the run last week. We know at all levels, one of the better defenses in the NFL, formidable pass rush, of course, probably one of the best secondaries in the NFL as well, led by Denzel Ward, who has again been performing at an elite level this season. Commanders kept Jayden Daniels clean last week. That's against the Cardinals, so very different story in terms of what they're going to be facing this weekend. So I do think that's much more of a test than Arizona were able to provide on that side of the ball last week. Having said that, the Commanders ran the ball really well and have been doing really well, not only with Brian Robinson and their running backs, but also Jayden Daniels himself and the threat that he represents and the way they've been deploying that. Probably the revelation for me this season, though, has just been how good the Commanders' defense is, which probably shouldn't be that much of a surprise considering Dan Quinn is their head coach. But when you look at a team that traded away nominally their 2 best pass rushers last year, and yet comes back and has been able to play the sort of complementary football that they've been able to play this year, they're sitting on top of the NFC East for a reason. Daniels has been every bit as advertised and so far as the outstanding rookie quarterback in the NFL this year. I don't see any reason to believe that comes to a grinding halt with Cleveland in town this week, precisely because of what you've outlined there, Noel, the struggles they've had on offense. Kevin Stefanski was doing his best to talk up what he sees as signs of progress from Deshaun Watson and what he's been able to do. But I mean, just anemic passing numbers again last week. Fine, they didn't turn the ball over, but you're looking at about 5 or 6 yards per attempt. I don't think he's managed to top 100 passer rating so far this season. Not getting the wide receivers involved to anything like the degree that they're going to need to do. And they've struggled themselves to move the ball on the ground as effectively as they would want to give themselves the kind of balance that they'll need. I don't think they're going to get it done against the Commanders. This is a Washington victory for me. Shane.
Yeah, unless the Browns get a pick 6, I think the Commanders are going to come away winning this one.
Brian?
Desperate teams find ways to win games when they really don't look like they're going to. I'm going to go with the Browns. I think they find a way.
And you're on deck as well now, Brian, for Bengals-Ravens, one of the tastier matchups in that window at the weekend. An AFC North clash, of course. They leave no quarter in that particular division. It's an absolute bloodbath at the best of times. Ravens favoured by 2. Bengals got off the mark last week, notching their first win to keep them out of serious trouble. For both of these teams, though, this is a gotta-have game, even this early in the season. Which one of them comes out the best side of it?
It feels like the one team that can run the ball effectively, arguably one of the best running games in the league against one of the worst, because outside of last week's game in Carolina, where the Bengals finally got right with Brown, 2 touchdowns and over 100 yards, they've done nothing in the run game. Where we touched on it last week, I know you weren't here, but we touched on the Bills not being challenged in the run game effectively throughout the course of the first few weeks. And when they come up against a challenge, what's going to happen? Well, we saw in the big games, here comes Derrick Henry, and he runs the ball down the gut continuously over the course of the game. I think the Ravens are finding a way now. They're easing into that kind of early season form now where we see them kind of go on a run. And I was reflecting on the games they've played each other. Like, if you think of that playoff game a couple of years ago when the Ravens were expected to lose convincingly, they nearly won the game with Huntley's, he got thrown under the bus after the game, and there was a mad end to the game where there's a run back touchdown. They played each other last year, real close game, 27-24. The Ravens were underdogs going into that game. but it's a similar line. It's 2.5 points. It kind of reflects on where these two teams are. I think it'll come down to the fourth quarter, but ultimately I think the Ravens right now are on a mission this year. And for me, the Bengals just don't look right. As well as they played last week and put up 34 points, I wasn't convinced against a hapless Panthers team. So for me, I think the Ravens won't be daunted by going into Cincinnati. It's a Ravens victory.
There are two Lamar Jackson trends that I keep feeling that, well, they have to end sometime. One is that he's only lost one game against NFC opposition, where, Brian, before you even jump in, I'll remind everybody that's the Giants are the one blemish in his otherwise spotless resume against NFC teams. The other one is the Bengals, where he's 8-1 against the Bengals, with the sole exception, as you say, being that playoff victory that ended in dramatic fashion when the Ravens actually looked like they were going to win it against the head. So this has not been a happy hunting ground for Cincinnati. Part of me thinks, though, that this Bengals team is an absolutely clutch outfit. You know, they tend to lose sometimes the easy games, and they tend to win the hard games. That's been the pattern under Zach Taylor. We've talked about how frustrating they are and how slowly they start the season, and how Stefanski is 1-9 across his first two games over the last 5 seasons he's been there. Of course, they dropped their first 2 this season. In fact, they dropped their first 3 before they finally got back to winning ways last weekend. There have been signs of improvement. They haven't always been. They've been unlucky in a couple of the games that they've dropped. This is not a place I'd particularly like to come, especially after the Ravens have done what they did to the Bills last week. Now, having said all that, there are those funny come-down moments where a team has piled it on a high-profile opponent and come away with a statement victory. And the Ravens are, as we've talked about under Harbaugh, prone to dropping strange ones from time to time, and they're prone to, they have this unwanted statistic of having dropped more fourth quarter leads than any other team, and lost double-digit leads more often than any other team over the past 3 seasons. I still think they're worthy of the 2-point favoritism for many of the reasons that you've outlined, Brian. And, what we saw last weekend with Derrick Henry running at full steam, that is exactly what he was brought in to do. It's been building and building and building. I think they've got it where they want to right now. This is a formidable defense as well. It's the best defense that the Bengals are going to have faced this season. Yeah, they've been improving week on week, but it's still not quite right. This is still not peak Burrow and peak Bengals. The quicker they get there, the sooner they're going to get themselves out of trouble. This is probably the worst opponent that they could have wanted at this stage of the season, though, when they really need to have it. And this could put them in serious trouble. I think, like you, that it's a Baltimore win. Shane?
I think the Bengals will have something up their sleeve that they've been preparing for months in the fourth quarter. So that's why I think Cincinnati will win this one.
And no.
No, for me, I think I agree with yourself and Brian. I think it still doesn't feel quite right with the Bengals yet. And after a slow start, I think the Ravens are about to start rolling. So I think the Ravens take this one.
All right, Panthers at Bears is our next game. Panthers somewhat revived under Andy Dalton, who has a bit of a revenge game motivation for this one, rolling into Soldier Field, where he once was the backup quarterback and did manage to win himself a couple of games in a Bears uniform. Caleb Williams, of course, the Bears quarterback, been showing signs of improvement. Hit a 106 passer rating, his first time past 100 in their victory over the LA Rams last week. And I think, when it took Justin Fields 15 games to hit that mark, I think that's something that's quite significant. Yeah, not a huge amount of pass attempts there, which is exactly what Chicago fans would have wanted, having seen him attempt 52 passes the previous week in a defeat. I think much more balance to that Bears offense last week. Good to see DeAndre Swift getting into the action from a Bears perspective. The defense formidable. Yeah, they're up against a slightly undermanned Rams team last week, but Matthew Stafford was dealing, and he needs to be taken care of. They put him under just enough pressure. They got 3 bags last week. Gervon Dexter seems to have made a second-year leap as defensive end, proven a worthy partner for Montez Sweat on the Bears defense. That secondary has been elite. They've got more interceptions than any other unit in the NFL so far this season, which is kind of surprising. We talked about it in the offseason as being one of those volatile statistics. Chicago led the NFL in interceptions over the back half of last season, was second only to the 49ers in the season as a whole. That was due to taper off. You'd expect that to revert to the mean, but so far so good from a Chicago perspective, and that's really kept them in every game that they've played while they've been looking for the offense to catch up to speed. I think we're going to see more incremental progress from this Bears team this weekend. This is a part of the season where they really need to make hay, because you look at the second half of the season for the Bears and it's absolutely carnage. From week 10 onwards, they have all 8 of their or all 6 of their divisional games, home and away, against the Packers, against the Lions, and against the Vikings. Those are tough games. They're in the only breakup they have in the NFC North schedule then is they have the Seahawks and the 49ers in between. So this game for the Bears, they're well aware, is one that they really need to put in the bank. I think they will do so at home, and I think they're justifiably 3-point favorites. No.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think this is an important game for the Bears, given, look, last weekend felt like a game of two halves, literally, for me. The first half was that, penalties, not really doing much, not getting forward, not progressing much against the team they should be beaten. But the second half, things really did come together. You mentioned Swift, he had a really good game. Shane Waldron seemed to be better in his play call, and the offensive line then seemed to be a bit more solidified. You mentioned the quarterback. Obviously, he wasn't spectacular. He was just what you want from your rookie quarterback. You don't want them turning the ball over, and you want them playing mistake-free football, and then they could rely on that run game. And Swift obviously added in a lot of yards then through the air as well. So this weekend, I think it's important for the Bears, and it's important for Shane Waldron to show that last weekend wasn't a fluke, that, this is the way things are trending, that they are starting to maybe come together. And this weekend is a perfect game for the Bears to do that. I mean, the Panthers are not very good. That defense really shouldn't cause them too much trouble, hopefully, if things are trending the right way. And on the flip side, while Andy Dalton has come in and he's absolutely given a bit of life to this Panthers offense, of Deontay Johnson is looking good. Chuba Hubbard's come up with a few touchdowns now. They're at least looking respectable. I still think this Bears defense should be way, way too strong for this Panthers offense. And I think the Bears should go in and handle things fairly easily. And if they don't, I do think there will be questions again. And I think the Bears want to avoid that at all costs, because it turned from kind of excited and ready for the season to very quickly it kind of turned to, should we have got Waldron? Should we have drafted his quarterback? And I think the Bears want to pull away from that negative vibe now and just put things on the straight and narrow. And I think this weekend they will. I think they'll be too strong for the Panthers.
Brian?
I'm with you guys. I'm seeing some numerous reports this week who suggested this could be a really, really tight and close game, and Andy Dalton could potentially put one over his old team. Can't say if it's Bears for me.
And Shane, round us out.
This is going to be a breeze for the Windy City.
Very good. That brings us to the end of our first segment of Game 5 picks. That break brought to you by our partner Buskers on the Ball in Dublin's Temple Bar. €6 pints from 6 on NFL Sundays. Remember, of course, this NFL Sunday, the action kicks off at 2:30 because we have the first of the London games. Brian and Shane will be there at Tottenham Hotspur Stadium to see the Vikings host the Jets in that game in N17. We start this segment of our Week 5 picks, though, with the Bills' visit to Houston to take on the Texans. This is the narrowest line of the weekend. Bills currently favoured by a point, but that flipped from the Texans, who had been favourites earlier on this week. What does the Desert know, and what do QuinnBet know that other people that they didn't at the start of the week? Shane, the Bills coming off the back of that humbling defeat against the Ravens. Texans got back on the road and back to winning ways last weekend, but it hasn't necessarily been smooth sailing for a team that were picked by many people as potential contenders this year.
No, it hasn't been. I mean, even the game against Jacksonville last week, it was sort of played right down to the wire. But in terms of this matchup, and I guess what you were saying, what Vegas knows, I think at earlier parts of the week, there was some reports coming out that Joe Mixon might be returning for Houston. And I think the further we get into the week, we might realize that actually he will not be playing this game. And when I put my notes down and I'm writing down why I think the Bills will win this game, I have in massive capital letters, not facing Derrick Henry. Because it's just a fact that that the Bills' it's always been a a weakness of the Bills when they play against a really potent run game, as they did last week between Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry. The defense doesn't really know what to do. It's going to be very different tasks this week playing against Houston, against CJ Stroud, as somebody who, put up a lot of yards last week, 340 yards plus, still managed to get 2 touchdowns. He did take a lot of sacks, but I don't think there's any problem dealing with pressure unless it's against the Vikings, but that's a different story. But my problem from a Houston point of view is the fact that their secondary, I just don't think is good enough to properly shut down the kind of late game deep pass chaos that Josh Allen will throw, because they've let in 6 touchdowns with only 1 interception in the last few games. In terms of like when you're facing those kind of deep passes. And we know that that's the kind of thing that the Bills are going to throw. Fair enough, there is the whole Stephon Diggs return thing. I'm very interested to see how he performs individually. This has the potential to be a high-scoring game, but I think a high-scoring game, the Bills will be able to win simply because the Texans will be too reliant on CJ Stroud to do all the work. And I think that the Bills are too good to fall for a team like that.
No, you were very hot on the Texans at the start of this season, and no reason to cool off on them yet. But they probably haven't, if they're being honest, fully hit stride just now.
No, it feels like they really have a bit more in the tank that they need to pull out, because there are some things. I mean, Shane mentions the run game there, and we know a big problem last year with the Texans was, they had CJ Stroud, they had Nico Collins, they had Tank Dell, but they just didn't have that run game that could help them change it up a little bit and hurt teams in a different way. And with Joe Mixon still potentially injured, that is absolutely a worry that, the Bills could look to kind of take advantage of that, because the Bills obviously are a good team. We mentioned last week with the Ravens, and, I said earlier, I feel like the Ravens are about to go on a run, and look, they're a good team. They can probably do that to anyone on the day. But I think this Texans team have a bit more to get out of them. On defense, they haven't been terrible, but I think you could still be looking at them and maybe hoping you can get more out of those main guys there, and Danielle Hunter and Will Anderson Jr. But on offense, it's the running game that will be tricky for them to overcome. But I think CJ Stroud is good enough to do that. Now, there's an issue with the O-line to a point where there's a lot of penalties being given away at the moment, and CJ Stroud has been sacked a little bit more than they would want him to be. But I still think, looking at this offense, it is strong enough. It might be a bit tougher without that run game, but they still have weapons there. Shane mentioned Stephon Diggs. Obviously, he'll be well up for this game. And I think the Texans, I'm going to keep plumbing for them every week, but I think the Texans will have enough to win what I think will be one of the best games of the weekend. And obviously Josh Allen's going to be no pushover. He'll be wanting to come back from last weekend and really put a shift in this weekend. But I think the Texans will probably be just a little bit too strong in a high score and narrow win.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's a home Houston stand for me, Brian.
Number 1 in time of possession offensively, Texans. Number 1 in the red zone this season. Texans, worst penalised team in the league. Texans cleaned that up on Sunday, and I think they get over the line. I'm going to go with the Texans as well.
Right, next up we have the Colts visiting Jacksonville to take on the embattled Jaguars and their head coach Doug Peterson, who's many people's favourite to get the first P45 of the season. Jags favoured though at home in this one. I'm going to nail my colours to the mast and say this is one that goes against the head for me. I think the Colts are just about in position to take this on. That was very impressive what they did last weekend. A little bit of a question mark over Richardson's fitness. I think just about now he looks like he's on track to return. But as we saw at least last weekend, if he goes out or if he can't make it, Joe Flacco, obviously a more than capable deputy, was particularly impressed with how Steichen approached diagnosing that Steelers defense. Obviously the strength of the Pittsburgh's team. They seem to find these soft spots all the time. Pittman had an incredible game, Michael Pittman, and they ran the ball well. Obviously you would like to see them deploy Anthony Richardson in the running game a little bit more judiciously and keep him out of harm's way. We saw what can happen yet again last weekend. If you're allowing him run the way he is, he's going to get injured. It's as simple as that. The guy doesn't give himself up. He'll always fight for a couple of extra yards. He puts himself in harm's way, and in the NFL, that's the best way to get harmed. The Jags, they're an interesting team to me. I'm not quite sure they're as bad as the talk radio in Jacksonville, which Kieran brings us daily reports from, would have you believe. Now, it depends on which side of the incompetence versus bad luck line you fall. If you look at their loss against the Browns, and we talked about this at length a couple of weeks ago, Browns, I think, gave up something like 13 penalties in that game, seemed to do everything they could to lose it, and somehow the Jags couldn't find a way to get over the line. That's not good. I think over the course of a season, though, that type of game and the type of game they had against the Dolphins, another close one that they probably should have had and didn't, they tend to even themselves out. And I don't think the Jaguars are quite the pushover that some people have painted them out to be. I think there's a reason why they're favoured here against the Colts team that is coming in with a slight question mark over the fitness of their quarterback. I think though Indianapolis will come out with the win here. I think they will overturn the hometown favourites. Brian.
I could see why everyone would assume it would be a Colts victory. It's that kind of, but it's that AFC South nature of teams that when they're least expected to find a victory, they do. For me, Doug Peterson has the coach the right game here. We talked about it on Monday, how he's gone for it on fourth down. He's one of the worst in the league, in terms of fourth down plays. But on third down in the fourth quarter this season, 1 of 9, they've only been effective in getting a first down in the fourth quarter once. They got to clean that up. They got to play right football in the fourth quarter when it comes down to the game. You touched on it there. They've been in a lot of games, but they're just not getting. It's not a case of getting the look. They're just not, coaching effectively to get the game over the line. And we've seen that time and time again over the years. That they just, with Doug Peterson, he's too aggressive at times when he should be a little bit conservative. And then when he's conservative when you think he's going to be aggressive. In this instance, I'm going to lean with the Jags. I think they're in another situation where they have to finally get a victory. And if they don't get it this weekend, where do they get it? They're going to go to London next week, play against a Bears team that could be potentially coming off another win. Then they got the Patriots at Wembley. Like, that would be a difficult game itself against Jared Mayo. They have to have this one. I think they find a way. I don't think it'd be pretty, but I think they get the victory.
Interesting. No.
I agree with Brian's last sentence there. I don't think it'll be pretty, but I think the Colts might just have enough to get the win.
Shane, how do you see it?
I think the reason the Jags are favourites is because the Colts look a lot better with Anthony Richardson than they did with Joe Flacco. But regardless, I think that even with Joe Flacco as quarterback, as I probably expect, I think they'll come away with a victory.
Shane, your Pats host the Dolphins this weekend and a divisional clash. I mentioned that the Bills-Texans game had the narrowest spread. This, of course, sits alongside it. I should have mentioned the Pats favoured by a single point. Are they worth it?
Favoured by a single point, in that if there was possible to only score a single point, they would win this match 1-0. I'm going for the Patriots here, and it's not out of any great kind of hometown love or belief in my boys. It is just the Dolphins have proven themselves to be so ridiculously bad. And I have to, he's not here, I have to give credit to Kieran on this and that. Before the season, I backed Mike McDaniel as somebody who I thought was a good head coach who had planned for many different situations. I think that the first situation he planned for will be a situation that Tua will be injured. And that has just not been the case at all. And then defensively as well, I think the Dolphins have taken a real step back.
You raise a good point there, and this is something that I heard the guys on Heed the Call talking about earlier on this week, where if you go back to the class of 2010, 2011, that famous Washington, as they then were, different name of the team, and we won't mention the team because it's a racial slur, but when they had LaFleur, when they had Mike McDaniel, when they had McVay, when they had Kyle Shanahan, you look at how each of those other coaches under that system have managed to cope with backup quarterbacks. And, you can throw Kevin O'Connell in the mix as well. I know he wasn't there at that time and isn't part of that tree, but what good coaches managed to do with a backup and how they plan for an eventuality when their main guy gets injured. We haven't seen that from Mike McDaniel. That, to me, is the hallmark of the truly elite offensive mind and the truly elite coach, that they can cope with a backup and they have a plan. He doesn't seem to have one.
No, and they didn't seem to have one in the offseason when it came to who they were getting in. I mean, Mason Rudolph, who played a pretty decent game, or at least he was made look pretty decent for the Tennessee Titans on the other side, was somebody that they probably should have got pretty early in that offseason. And there's so many little things which they're getting wrong. Like, I've said it before, and I'll say it again. Snaps. The center snapping the ball is still snapping way too high. Lads, I can see it from here. Fix that. Tyreek Hill is dropping passes. The passes behind the line of scrimmage aren't accurate, or aren't even close to being accurate. And when you look at the difference between the Dolphins and the Patriots aren't a team designed to win. They are the team designed to keep things close. It's why we're sticking with Jacoby Brissett as quarterback. It's why the run game has been so prevalent, and it's why so much has been put into defense. The idea is to keep things close, and if things are close in the fourth quarter, the things might bounce our way. It bounced our way against Cincinnati. It didn't bounce our way against Seattle. And when we face against two teams that were built to win, the 49ers and the Jets, they won, and we were kind of okay with that. This Dolphins team was a team that was built to win, and as soon as Muhammad Ali, everyone's got a plan until you get punched in the face. As soon as they were punched in the face, they realized they had no second plan. So I'm looking at this matchup, it's in New England. I think a lot of New England fans are kind of baying for blood for Miami because they've been the one team in the AFC East who've been a consistent thorn on our side. I think there are plenty of ingredients here for New England to grind out a close victory. Not close because there's a lot of high scoring, but close because the Patriots will rely a lot on their running game, and the Dolphins don't have a running game because their best runner was the quarterback. Devon Achane, I think, averaged 1.5 yards per carry. They were relying on Tyreek Hill to run jet sweeps. I just don't see the Dolphins putting up anything good. So the Patriots are favorites by a low score, and I think that is fair. I'm going for my good old New England boys to grind out a victory here.
No, we normally expect the Dolphins to be roaring at this stage of the season. They tend to come in like lions and go out like lambs. We haven't seen much of a roar so far this year. Obviously, Tua's injury is a big part of that, but they're kind of in squeaky bum time here already. They dropped this one against a divisional rival, and they're leading snookers.
They absolutely are. I mean, the Dolphins have been the most disappointing team in the NFL this season for me. Look, we know you lose your quarterback. That's a massive handicap for any team. But still, we talk about Mike McDaniel, how he's the offensive guru, how he can make things happen, how he can scheme things up. We watched how they started last season on fire, just putting points up on everyone. And as Shane mentioned, those guys aren't doing it at the moment. Like when you have Waddle at wide receiver and Tyreek Hill, you're expecting a specific certain output from these guys, even with a backup quarterback like Tyler Huntley in there, and it's just not clicking. The run game, which we expect so much from, obviously Achane and Mostert have been injured, and Achane came back last week, was fairly ineffective. So yeah, there are a lot of questions about this Dolphins team. On the New England team, Shane said it as well. They're not built to go out and win at the moment. These guys are in the start of a rebuild, and they're just out there kind of being solid and trying to kind of get what they can. I found this one so hard. I was close to going for New England, but I'm going to say Tyler Huntley had last weekend to bed in. I'm going to put my faith that the offense will be better this week because they can't be much worse, especially with those players that they have. And I think maybe they'll do enough to pull it out, but I mean, it literally could go either way. But I'm just giving the benefit of the doubt to Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle and Achane that maybe they can scheme something up just to beat the Pats. But who knows? It's not the game I'm looking forward to this weekend. I'll put it like that.
Yeah, I gotta say, I think the Dolphins are looking pretty lost right now, and I can only imagine that, given the circumstances of Tua's injury as well, it's probably something we haven't talked about enough. Like, that leaves ripple effects. It seems to have badly impacted Mike McDaniel, as understandably it would. And I think the Patriots got to be looking at this one saying, look, we know, given the nature of the rebuild, nobody was going and expecting them to light it up. They've been competitive, they've been scrappy, they're hanging in games. This is one that they're looking at and targeting and saying, yeah, I think this is one we can put a win on the board here, and I think they'll do that. Brian?
Garrett Wilson got injured in the warm-up last week, effective running back who was supposed to step in for Mostert. Mostert expected to come back. You're now gone from one potentially effective running back to three at the weekend. And I agree with Noel. I think Huntley's had another week to get himself prepared for what's expected of him. And they have too many playmakers, and to get them going on Sunday, they'll win the game. So it's a Dolphins victory for me.
The first of the 9 o'clock games sees the newly resurgent Denver Broncos host the Las Vegas Raiders. The Broncos are favoured by 3 points in this one, Noel, coming off the back of that 10-9 upset win in New York in filthy weather. It should be a lot nicer in Mile High Stadium this weekend, or such is the forecast. Will the sun continue to shine on Bo Nix and the Broncos?
This is going to be a good one. I mean, look, you look at Bo Nix, he has -7 yards in the first half. I think he finishes with 60 yards. I mean, that's not something you're going to be getting away with year in, year, or week in, week out. But on the opposite side, you look at this Broncos defense, and they are up there with defenses in the NFL. They've been, I think they're second in total yards allowed all season. They've really been carrying this team. Yeah, I look at the Raiders. Obviously, we see last weekend the Raiders get their win, but I don't know. I'm tough on this. Obviously, Devontae Adams, we talked about him earlier on, is missing, and I think that is going to be a big loss for this Raiders team, who didn't really do much through the air last weekend. Although, as I mentioned earlier, they did do a pretty good job in the run game. But I think this Broncos team, that defense is a good defense. It'll be able to handle the Raiders. but I don't think the offense for the Broncos will be able to do much. Bo Nix really has not much around him. As I say, he was competent last weekend. He didn't turn the ball over, which is what you want, but he didn't really do much outside of that. And I think, again, another game that I'm not overly looking forward to, but I think the Raiders may have enough there. I think Max Crosby's coming back, so he should cause a lot of problems for them. And I think Gardner Minshew may be able to just about lead the Raiders to a win against a Broncos team that does have a very good defense, but whose offense, I mean, last weekend, this Broncos defense was tailor-made to take on that Jets offense. And they had Surtain on Garrett Wilson, which really took away all the options there. But again, on offense, I don't think you can live like that week in, week out and get wins. So I think the Raiders might just take one here.
A tale of two coaches here, Brian. If we rewind back to the start of the season, we were saying Antonio Pierce riding high in a wave of player power. The players plumped for him and they got him in there. The vibe seemed to have completely turned around from the dark days of the Josh McDaniels regime. Now Davante Adams is on his way out of the place. The Broncos, on the other hand, under Sean Payton, showing that there's life in his coaching playbook just yet, and doing a lot better than most people had expected.
Yeah, we didn't touch on it earlier on when we were discussing the trade, I suppose, solution that's on the way with Davante Adams. There's numerous reports out there that the Raiders players aren't happy overall with the experience so far working for Antonio Pierce. The Antonio Pierce that they're dealing with this season, as opposed to the one they were dealing with towards the end of last season. But what he did at the end of last season was he came in and made things fun again, because obviously there was such a cloud of dysfunction under the former head coach, and it was enlightening for a while. But the harsh reality is he's now the head coach. His demeanor has changed of what his expectations are, and some of the players aren't enjoying it. And we saw, we're only 2 weeks removed when he was saying about players making business decisions and pulling out of tackles. I didn't think they were overly impressive last weekend. I thought the Browns, had that game to take, and they couldn't find a way to get over the line. This is a slugfest type of game. Let's be fair, Bo Nix last weekend, his numbers were disastrous. They got over the line with one touchdown and various different other components led to the victory. Okay, he had a stellar game the week before in Tampa, but we did see in the opening games of the season that he struggled particularly against a team that could keep it tight defensively. And for me, it's all about where the Raiders' heads are at. Like Max Crosby is now, he's also tinkering now, and he was obviously the one player that was very much Raiders pro, whatever's going on in the background, he's there for the team no matter what. Even he's starting to relinquish that kind of attitude as well. I'll go Raiders. I think if it comes down to who I believe have the better matchup in terms of players that can get it done, I think the Raiders have as opposed to the Broncos. So I'll lean Raiders. And the Raiders have a good record in fairness going into Mile High over the years. They had a number of victories when Derek Carr was there. Davante Adams walk-off touchdown victories. I think they find a way to win it close.
Yeah, the wind is only blown one way here for me, and it's blown in the direction of Denver. I think the Broncos are going to win this one. Shane?
Yeah, I'm going with the Broncos, but I'm not entirely convinced. I just really don't know what to make of either of these two teams. They're just so unpredictable in terms of what way they approach week in, week out. But I think the Broncos are due a good week this week.
That brings us to the end of our second segment of Week 5 game previews and picks on the Irish NFL show. We move on now to another divisional clash, this time in the NFC West, where the 49ers host the Cardinals in Santa Clara. This game has the biggest spread of the weekend. 49ers favoured by 7.5 points at home. I could see the justification for that. Quite simply, it's strength against strength on one side of the ball, where the Cardinals take on the 49ers defense, and a strength against weakness on the other side of the ball, where the 49ers take on a pretty anemic looking Cardinals defense. Cardinals really didn't do much last weekend when they got pummeled by the Commanders, couldn't get a hand on Jaden Daniels, as we talked about a little bit earlier when we were previewing the Commanders game. Kyler Murray and the Cardinals offense had quite a nice game actually against the Commanders, which got slightly overlooked because they couldn't stop the Commanders rolling at all. And the Commanders put up 42 points. Murray was nearly perfect. Again, he's got the highest passer rating of any quarterback on average over the first 4 and now heading into 5 games of the season. Got a good receiver core there. We've talked about before. James Conner playing well for them. Definitely looking well under that new OC, and it's coming together nicely. But I just don't think they've got anywhere near what they're going to need to be able to deploy to slow down the 49ers with George Kittle and Deebo Samuel back in the fold. Deebo makes that offense look completely different. They're a much more containable outfit without either Deebo or Christian McCaffrey. Obviously, CMC is out for the foreseeable now, but Deebo made a big difference on his return. Kittle looked fit again, and that's a massive fill-up for Brock Purdy, who has been improving more and more, to be fair to him, and looking a more and more assured passer so far this season in something close to adversity based on the weapons he's had at his disposal thus far in his 49ers career. I think the 49ers will win this, and I think they'll cover the spread, to be honest. Seeing what the Commanders did to the Cardinals last weekend, I don't hold out a huge amount of hope that even another good Kyler performance can keep it closer than 7.5, 8 points. It's 49ers for me all day long. Shane, what do you think?
I was looking at this. This is the second week in a row, by the way, that the 49ers had the biggest spread in their favor of the weekend after last week. But I thought that was a little bit unfair in the Cardinals, because I think against divisional opponents, they tend to be a slightly different beast. We saw that when they put up 41 points against the Rams 2 weeks ago. But the reason why I think the Niners are favorites, and the reason why I think they'll win, is just a difference in offensive talent. I mean, you mentioned there Deebo Samuel is coming back. It's great for Brock Purdy to kind of have his full chorus of receivers back to be able to throw to. And even if you look as well, I don't think the Cardinals are particularly good at stopping the run game. And Jordan Mason, even in the absence of Christian McCaffrey, he's done a sterling job. It's quite clear that the offensive line knows what it's doing in that regard in San Francisco. And when you look at the running game on the Arizona Cardinals side of things, James Conner has had a couple of good games. He was 100 yards plus last week against Washington, but he's quite capable of putting up a couple of duds as well. I think he's had 2 good games and 2 meh games so far. Is this a game against that 49ers defense where he actually slows down and the Cards maybe don't find a way to properly get going, or when they really need a crucial third down conversion in the third and fourth quarters, that they're not able to get it on the ground, and Kyler Murray is either held or a cornerback swats down his pass, things like that can really make the difference. So for that reason, I just think the 49ers have just a better spread of talent. Do I think that is worthy they are so heavy favorites? No, I think this will be closer than people are expecting, but the longer we get into this game, the more weapons that the 49ers have to throw at the Cardinals defense, both on the ground and in the air. So I think the further we get into this game, the bigger the gap is going to be.
Brian, what's your pick?
I think this is a given, Connor. I just think this. I think the spread is there to be taken, and I think it should be. This is the one for the weekend, in my opinion. I think we saw 49ers team come back nicely last weekend.
Is this the Brian O'Leary rocking chair lock of the weekend?
No, I wouldn't go that far, but I think they'll have more than enough to get over the line. And the 7.5 for me is reasonable. I think it's reasonable, bearing in mind how comprehensive the Niners can be at home.
Yeah, in fairness, it takes a lot to get into the rocking chair now. We shouldn't be applying that label lightly.
The rocking chair is coming. The rocking chair is coming shortly. Don't worry.
I can't wait. That Giants at Seahawks. Yeah, I can see it now. Noel, what do you think?
Yeah, I think at home the 49ers will have too much. I think they'll get the win.
Right, it is to the Giants we turn next, Brian, because they travel to Seattle, where the Seahawks are favoured by 6 points at Lumen Field.
Yeah, they travel to Seattle. Thankfully, I'll probably be travelling, give or take, in and around the time of that game, or certainly when the second half kicks off. We'll be flying back late from London. I was quite comfortable about this game over the course of the week. I thought the Giants have a really good chance. Obviously, the Malik Neighbours news today is a huge blow, and it's kind of telling of where the Giants are. That your marquee wide receiver is essentially your rookie wide receiver, and without him, the offense will not likely head stutter, but in all likely stutter. What gives me, I suppose, a little bit of confidence is I'm not entirely sure about this Seattle defense. I know it's a head coach, a defensive minded head coach, and look, the Giants are never in a million years like a Lions team. Don't get me wrong, and Lions can do that to most teams, but there has been teams who have found ways to do a number on Seattle, in particular when they go out there. And the Giants have had quite a reasonable record out there the last couple of years when little expected of them. But I think what we saw
that was a strange game as well, Brian. It was kind of like the Cardinals Commanders game that we just talked about there, where it was kind of overlooked that Seahawks actually played a really good game offensively. They just couldn't stop the Lions at all. Yeah,
and that's where I was going to go. Geno Smith is the highest. He's the number one quarterback in the league in terms of yards per throw. So kind of it signifies this offense in its own way can be explosive, and that's what concerns me. The Giants secondary is banged up. It's poor at the best of times, and it's even worse when it's banged up. So yeah, I could see the Giants potentially living with them for a couple of quarters, but ultimately the Seattle come out on top.
Shane, as Brian was saying, it's a banged-up Seattle defense, but they have been slinging the ball. The connection between DK Metcalf and Geno Smith in particular, a highlight. Jackson Smith and Jigba making a second-year leap there as well. It's a powerful Seahawks passing attack, and we haven't necessarily seen all of what a Mike McDonald defense can do yet. Is that enough to give the Giants a glimmer of hope?
I think where the Giants can get a glimmer of hope is the fact that Seattle's defensive weakness is in the run game. Because let's be fair, the Giants' offensive strength is not going to be in the pass game, particularly with Malik Neighbors out and whoever it is they play at quarterback and it's a general pass play. Now, in fairness, who is it? Singletary, not Stevenson, didn't have a very good game against the Cowboys at all. But if you look at the teams that have managed to really get good chunks of yards against the Seahawks, you look at the way the Lions went by them. They had 2 running backs go for over 80 yards. The Patriots did as well. And the Broncos really utilized that ground game. So if the Giants have been planning well and they've been watching the tape and they've been really trying to find a way to utilize what they can do on the ground, they can maybe keep things close, maybe even get a couple of scores up top, because I think Sexy Dexy and co can really can maybe put some pressure on in the first half. The problem is, though, I think as you alluded to, Connor, once the game gets later into the we get into those deep parts and the energy starts running down and receivers naturally get a little bit more room. That's when the Seahawks start slinging the ball, and they can really get good yards after catch as well. So I have the Seahawks winning this one. I don't think by the time that we're getting on the plane in Stansted that Brian will be ranting too much, because I think we'll both be surprised at how close the game is. But by the time we land in Dublin, I think the Seahawks will have the job done.
Noel, you and I will be safely on the ground watching the games. Will the Seahawks, or will the Giants rather, be able to ground that Seahawks passing attack?
No, I think the Seahawks will. I think overall the Seahawks are a better team than the Giants. Brian's obviously mentioned some injury news the Giants got, which will be a real blow to them. And I think the Seahawks, while not perfect at the moment, I think they're good enough to get this win.
Yeah, everybody needs good neighbours, and the Giants, particularly as you were saying, Brian, need him this weekend. Not having him is a big blow at Seattle for me too. We move on now to the Packers Rams game. Noel, Packers favoured on the road here by 3 points against a Rams team that is among the most banged up in the NFL. Obviously down their 2 best receivers, which isn't a huge help. They've battled manfully despite that. We talked at length about their victory against the 49ers a couple of weeks ago. This will be a good one for them to really flex their muscles. Wouldn't they love to take down Green Bay? But Packers, as I say, are favourites in this one. Will they live up to it?
I think they will. I mean, look, we talked about that win the Rams got a couple of weeks ago, and what an amazing comeback it was. And that was just one of those weekends. I think they were brought back down to earth last weekend against the Bears, but it's so difficult for them. They are missing so many players. Obviously, on offense, their wide receivers are gone. I mean, Matthew Stafford is a top class quarterback, but there's only so far he can carry a team when he has those kind of players missing. I mean, Tutu Atwell is like his main pass catcher now at the moment, seems to be kind of the number one guy the way things are. And look, that offense, it's just been decimated. It's too tough for them to overcome, I think, in the long run over a season. Defense, look, the defense hasn't been great either, especially in the run game. I was actually very impressed last weekend with some of the players on defense. Jared Verse.
Jared Verse had a great game.
Yeah. He had a great game, and he had two sacks taken away because of penalties, which I felt sorry for him because he was really getting in there at times. But it's just not right on defense for these guys at the moment. And I think, look, we look at the Packers team, that was an absolute shock that they fell behind so badly last weekend against the Vikings. I mean, while I did think the Vikings would win, and I never saw it going that way. But then second half, I mean, could it be argued that the Vikings took the foot off the pedal, or did Green Bay just find that kind of rhythm to kind of pull it back and make the game close at the end? But I think going into this game, I think this Packers team has way too much on offense for a beat-up Rams team. I think Jordan Love came back last weekend. He'll be another week into it now. We'll see if last weekend's game will have just helped him knock that rust off a bit. Obviously, he throws 4 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, so you think maybe he'll be getting those interception numbers down a bit. But overall, this Packers team has too much, and I think if they play to any sort of level, I think they'll beat this Rams team, and I think it'll be more than 3.
I can remember reading an article last season when there was talk about whether the Bears would hang on to Justin Fields, and GMs across the league were asked anonymously by ESPN, and one of them said something really interesting. He said, ultimately, what it comes down to is in the fourth quarter, when you're 2 scores down, you need a guy who's going to be able to sit in the pocket and throw the ball, and who's going to be able to succeed in obvious passing situations. And he didn't think Justin Fields was that guy. He said you can't win a Super Bowl without that guy, because ultimately you're going to inevitably end up in that situation in a knockout game. Packers weren't in that situation last weekend. Of course, it's a regular season game. It's not a playoff game. But it was interesting to me that that's what Jordan Love had to do. And I know what you're saying, only 3 picks, but he had to throw the ball 54 times. They're way, way in the hole.
Yes.
So they just had to go to the air. And what they did was really impressive. I know it didn't ultimately get them the victory in Minnesota, and they were just way too far behind to claw it back, but outscored the Vikings 29-3 in the second half, and damn near came close to pulling off what looked a nearly impossible comeback at one point. I think that's something that we'll look back on and go, that's a serious step forward in Jordan Love's development. I liked what I saw from Matthew Stafford last weekend, I have to say, in adversity. It's not only that he's able to dip into his bag of tricks and that he's able to get the very most out of very, very limited resources around him. And it's not just because of the way this McVay offense operates. It's not just about not having talented pass catchers in Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua. It's also about what they do in terms of blocking. And McVay demands an awful lot of his receivers. And that's why the step down to the backup guys takes so much out of what they can do. And they're much more limited in how they can approach taking apart the opposing defense, and they really come back to earth in a big way. I thought, that said, the Rams damn near came close to pulling off again an unlikely victory. It's only the interception by Jaquan Brisker by the Bears that really seals the deal for Chicago at the weekend. It was a much more defensive-led effort ultimately, but the Rams are they're just taking on too much water at the moment. I just don't think they have the weapons really to trouble the Packers. I think the second half Packers that we saw are much closer under Jordan Love to what that team can do. I think, if they had that one over again, that they would definitely have won it. It was a little bit of ring rust from Jordan Love having been out with injury, and I think he can forgive that. I think he comes with his much closer to match fitness this weekend. I think that's going to be enough to see Green Bay over the line. Brian?
I also throw in the SoFi factor. It's going to be 80% Packers fans. It's going to be more like a home game than it is a road game. I think the Rams are up against it. It's Packers for me.
Shane?
Yeah, the Packers won't succumb to a fourth quarter comeback if that's what it comes to. So I think the Packers will win.
Right, the final game of the weekend on Sunday night is Cowboys at Steelers. One of those interesting interconference rivalries because, of course, they played each other 3 times in the Super Bowl. So there is a bit of a history between these two, Shane. Steelers coming off the back of that unfortunate loss against the Colts, which was a bit of a disappointment for the Steelers faithful, gathered in large numbers, over 800 of them, in Croke Park at the weekend for a very well attended and very enjoyable watch party up until the end. Apart from that, Mrs. Lincoln, how was the play? Will they get back to winning ways against Dallas this weekend?
Yeah, I was fortunate enough to be at that watch party in Croke Park, and I think the stunned silence at the start when the Colts managed to build up a 17-0 lead was deafening in itself, because no one expected the Pittsburgh Steelers defense to just not wake up until they were already 17 points down. And fair play to the Steelers, they did manage to bring it back. They brought it to a very close game. I mean, if you're leaving things up to a final drive, I'm not really quite sure how angry you could be with how Justin Fields and the offense dealt with that final drive in the fourth quarter. Like, I
can tell you from better experience, Shane, if you're leaving things up to the final drive with Justin Fields, the game is already lost.
Yeah, and look, like, that's the thing. I mean, every game that the Steelers have played so far, I mean, they previous to that, they only conceded 26 points in 3 games. They've kept it close, and Justin Fields has done enough just to score more than the defense lets in. So when you're looking at this matchup with the Cowboys now, you know Watt is coming off a game where he got 0 quarterback hits, but he's facing against an offensive line which is a pretty damn good offensive line. Dak Prescott only faces 14% of plays where there's quarterback pressure. For context, it's roughly the average is about 30%. So it's pretty good. That's a pretty good protection that Dak Prescott is getting. My problem is what is Dak Prescott using that pass protection for? Is he going to get enough yards? Is he going to get enough touchdowns? Do the Cowboys have a run game dynamic enough to get past the Steelers defense, which will be, I think, geared up right from the very start to try and, they know that it's prime time. They know that there's a bit of an El Clasico nature to this rivalry from a 20th century point of view anyway, because they're 2 of, if not the 2 most supported teams in America. and to face each other in those 2 Super Bowls. They understand the history there. I think the Steelers are coming into this at home, by the way, from the start to put all presses on. And I just think that, if I look at what Justin Fields is capable of doing, what that offense is capable of doing, there was a moment there during the game when I was chatting to a few of the people at the watch party. I was like, at what point does the Russell Wilson conversation start? I don't think it starts after this game. I'm just not confident in the Cowboys to, when it matters, be able to find a play that will get past the Steelers defense. Either not in the first quarter, not in the fourth quarter. And I think this is going to be a low-scoring game. I think this is going to be another 20-14 Steelers win, something in that ballpark. But I just think the Steelers defense, after not waking up until midway through the second quarter last week, they got plenty of rest. So I think they've got plenty of energy now going into Sunday night.
Brian, it's America's team against arguably America's best run team over the years. Which of them emerges victorious?
I said a couple of weeks ago, when the Steelers find themselves in a position where they're down by scores and have to chase a game, they wouldn't be a recipe for success, and that was the case last week. They gave themselves too much to do. This team are built to play with a lead, allow the defense to go after the quarterback. I'm not sold on the Cowboys though, in terms of what I saw last week. I felt it was a game which the Giants had for the taking. They couldn't get it over the line. They've got the worst run offense in the league, and they've got the worst run defense in the league. So what does that lend into? It lends into a game in which the Steelers are going to rely on the run game.
You're telling me Zeke wasn't the answer?
No, Zeke is very much not the answer now, and I don't think any of the other guys in the background are the answer. This is a game that's prime for Harris. It's a prime for Warren. It's prime for Justin Fields and run pass options. There's no Marco Lawrence in this game. Micah Parsons is not going to play either. So you're asking for two of you're trying to challenge a defense without your best 2 pass rushers to go after the team. For me, this is the rocking chair game, Connor. This is the one. This weekend is going to be a comfortable Steelers victory, in my opinion. I think we're going to see this game, ease to a game in which the Steelers are victory, which people would never believe, but I think that's going to be the case, because I just don't think Dak is going to be in a situation. Dak's going to have to throw 45 to 50 times in this game, because the run game is so ineffective. And for him to do that against the Steelers defense and come out on top, I can't say it. It's a Steelers victory.
Rocking chair game for you, no?
I think it's going to be honest, I think it's going to be a tight one. And I've actually, before we started the show, I ended up changing my pick on this. I was going Cowboys, and then I've gone Steelers. I don't feel good either way, but I just think that Steelers defense is going to give them such an advantage over this Cowboys team. I think the Cowboys on offense, I'm not overly sold on Dak Prescott. I never really have been. I don't kind of trust him. I'm literally saying I trust Justin Fields more this weekend to do what he needs to do on offense than I do Dak Prescott. As Brian mentioned, these Cowboys don't even have a run game there to speak of. So if the Steelers can take care of CeeDee Lamb, that could be a big way to taking this win. So I'm going Steelers.
Yeah, I found this a difficult one to pick as well, but trusting in Justin has generally led me down a bad path. I'm going to pick the Cowboys to get it done this weekend. I'm not feeling particularly great about that. I certainly don't see that as a rocking chair game from my perspective, but that's what I'm going to go with. That is our lot for this week. Monday Night Football sees the Saints travel to the Chiefs. Of course, we will have a podcast out at lunchtime on Monday previewing those unbeaten Chiefs and whether the Saints can put an end to their run at Arrowhead. We're back on Monday ourselves at 9 o'clock to recap all the main talking points from Sunday's games once they're in the books. We'll also have that instant reaction podcast available from 2 a.m. on Monday morning for all of those who are on the road early, or all those shift workers who like to get their Monday morning fix of football on the Irish NFL Show.